Hello and welcome to Popmosis Film, and we are going to talk about film, which is what we do here on Popmosis Film. I am Josiah. I'm joined as always by Tyler and Paul. So how are you guys doing?
Doing well. We watched this movie, which just invoked a lot of feelings and thoughts and critique.
I had a really visceral reaction watching Donnie Darko again, and I'm surprised because I've seen this movie probably a few dozen times, and I had a real visceral, very moody reaction to it. But we can
dive reaction to Donnie Darko movie.
Yeah,
Donnie
it's
Darko
so bizarre.
What?
But we can dig further into
this movie. What? So we are talking about Donnie Darko today, written and directed by Richard Kelly, who, like myself, is a USC guy, so he went to USC. And I realize this, I have no actual personal connection or knowledge of him, but he was there in 97, I believe he graduated, and I got there in 2002, so there's not too far off. So I probably in some connected way have some connected tissue to knowing someone who knows him. Maybe not close, but I guarantee there's some thread through that I just thought about after the fact, just because when I looked up info about him, I'm like, oh, that's not that far off, and makes me feel kind of old, I'll say that. Produced by Adam Fields, Nancy Juvonen, I'm not sure how to say her name. She is, it's a tough one to say. She's Drew Barrymore's producer, so the Drew Barrymore connection. Drew Barrymore, I think, is listed as an executive producer. She, who also played the teacher, she was very significant in getting the finance, at least getting sort of the next level of financing for these guys. And so her coming in was big for them. And Sean McKittrick. Gosh, these names are hard for me today, but this one is more my writing, so I apologize to Mr. McKittrick, who has gone on to produce for Jordan Peele most recently, Get Out and Us and things like that, but he's had a long career producing.
I think he's part of Blumhouse now, I think.
Yeah. But he started out with Richard Kelly. They go back to SC. So the short film Visceral was produced with Kelly. It was I think it was maybe his graduate thesis film or something at SC. I'm not 100% sure, but I've never seen it. But that was kind of their start in the industry going back to that time frame. So with a budget of $4.5 million, I read $4.5 million in an interview with people that produced it, and I've also read $6 million, so I'm not 100% sure where it lands, but somewhere between 4.5 and 6.
Maybe a second wave of marketing added $1.5 million.
That was my thought, but I wonder, I know that maybe some of the song rights might have kicked up that budget, which we'll talk about, I think, in a moment here with how kind of the film went. I'm not 100% sure because I'm sure they were, for a film this small, that was probably a big part of the budget. And it made between, I read from the producers, it made $500,000, but it probably made between $500,000 and $1.5 million upon initial release in October of 26, 2001, where I did see it in the movie theater, as I shared with Paul. So I actually saw this in the movie theater at the time, which was, at the time, I was joke before kids I could go see movies, although this was 20 years ago, which is mind-blowing. This was 20 years ago. So, that's kind of the background info.
So I discovered, so I almost saw it in the theater, but what happened is, so I saw that I was eating a burrito, I was having dinner, and I saw in the newspaper this ad for Donnie Darko, and what's interesting is all it was is a black background and that white bunny face, so Frank the Bunny face, and it really captivated me, and I really was drawn into it, and so I was like, wow, what is this? And this was the internet was still, if you go on AOL, it takes 5 minutes to load a picture. It was, the internet's not really a thing in the way that it is now. So I would basically read, the newspaper about it and stuff like that. I was like, wow, this is an interesting film. And I circled the date and I was like, oh, I'll watch it on this day. And by the time I was going to watch it, it was already pulled from the theaters. At the time I was in Berkeley. And so I was bummed out, and I really was, but it was stuck in my head, and I didn't actually see it until I think maybe a year later, or maybe a couple months later, when it came out on DVD from Fox. And again, the white Frank the Bunny face on the black background really drew me to it. And I'm like, holy shit, that movie's out. So I bought it on DVD. And the first time I watched it, it was like a movie that was made specifically for me. Like it's so bizarre and so
wait,
it really resonated.
Were you at that point? Like,
I was 19 or 20. Oh wait. When I first saw it, I was probably like 20, 21. And so I'm not the same age or similar age as Richard Kelly. And so a lot of the things that he referenced, I specifically like remember in my childhood.
And Richard Kelly, real quick, he was like 25 at the time, so not
that far off from our age. And and the funny thing is, I read articles about this. Like it at Sundance, like it had a lot of buzz. Like the script was very ambitious, and people were like really into it. And they're like, wow, this guy Richard Kelly, he's like the talk of the town. Like, let's make this film. And they actually want to attach to somebody else, a more experienced director. But he's like, no, I want to direct this. As I wrote it, I want to direct it. And so there's a lot of buzz going at Sundance. And, those like Entertainment Tonight or one of those things. It's like the buzzometer and it's fire or whatever it is. And so during the Sundance, they were trying to find financiers. And it was such a mixed reception. In fact, it like bombed. And so nobody ended up financing it. And because of that, the movie was kind of festering, and it was threatened to go straight to video, which at that time is like the death knell for your movie. It's like basically your movie's being buried. Whereas, movies like this that are kind of more niche would actually go to the streaming, would probably go to like Hulu or Netflix, where it actually find an audience. But back in the day, they didn't really have a way to target something like this where it's more abstract.
And just to interrupt real quick, Paul, like to jump on that before you kind of move on, because I feel like where you're going is if it wasn't released theatrically, if it's like distributed to like HBO, Showtime, or direct-to-video, that's kind of like a step down. Unlike now, it's not viewed so much as a step down to go straight to streaming. That kind of difference has gone away. So I think that's a significant for younger viewers of this show, listeners might not know that was definitely like more low class, and it would sort of diminish, even if it doesn't do well theatrically. Just the cachet of a theatrical release was a bigger deal then. So
especially with and sorry again, especially with the cast that it has as well. Like Drew Barrymore was really big at this point. You also had Patrick Swayze, who was like really big, and you have a lot of supporting casts that are really, really big and established, and Jake Gyllenhaal, which is like really coming into the scene really, really hard. And like, I don't think was Bubble Boy before this or after this?
I think it was before.
I blocked out all memory of Bubble Boy. But he I know pretty recently he had come off of, what's that movie? October Sky was pretty nearly before this. So that was a big movie for him. And it was around that time frame.
Yeah. So basically, the reason why it had such a mixed reception at Sundance is because the Sundance at the time was it's independent films. They're very niche subject matter that is usually in the films. And this movie comes in there and has visual effects. Like it has that Abyss style liquid spear, and it has big name actors like Patrick Swayze and Drew Barrymore. Like it had the clout of like a more commercial film, yet the subject matter itself was more like indie film. And so a lot of people at Sundance were really suspicious of it, like the commercial Hollywood world was trying to intercept, the indie darlings or whatever. And so a lot of people were really receptive to it and like, hey, this is not playing by the rules. Like, this is not right. And even if like this movie is like $4.5 million is like a moderate budget for like a small film like this, but this movie feels and looks expensive. It looks much more much more expensive than it actually cost. And a lot of that has to do with the director of photography is Stephen Poster, who basically is when I was looking at documentaries about this, he was basically kind of guided Richard Kelly in how shots are developed. And he basically said, forget the age difference. I know I worked with Ridley Scott. Don't worry about this. I won't take the film away from you. I want to bring out your vision. Like, I'm not going to take the movie away from you. And he was able to, with his connections with Panavision, he was able to get anamorphic lenses, which is something that usually don't give to first-time directors. And so that's why it looks more robust and like it looks more epic than usual. And this whole movie like was filmed in 28 days, which resonates so well with the movie itself. So and the funny thing is we always talk about, I don't know, we kind of like talk about Christopher Nolan in the periphery. And basically the reason why this movie got a theatrical release is because he kind of championed it. He screened Newmarket screened it for Christopher Nolan, and at the time he was really big for Memento. Memento was like was a really big deal internationally.
Real quick though, Paul, Memento. The reason that was that Memento in this were both at Sundance together. So that's how Nolan saw it. Wow. He saw it at Sundance. Yeah, so he was there at Sundance. He was there at Sundance trying to get Memento sold. In the Bedroom was also there. Hedwig and the Angry Inch, if you've ever seen that one. So I think it's an important part of the story why Donnie Darko couldn't get distribution. I think Paul hit something really important there, but also just the competition of the caliber of movies it was going against. Sundance, not every year. This is the transition period for Sundance, though, where, for example, it always irks me, this isn't a truly independent film. It's a Hollywood film made by a first-time director, sure, but he's making it through Hollywood channels with Hollywood money. So it's not a true independent film. And I don't mean to downplay or diminish the effort, but it's not independent in the way something like Clerks is or other films. That's just the first one. That's like the uber independent movie.
Paranormal Activity, Saw.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good example.
Saw was pretty Hollywood.
Yeah, because like when they always talk about, My Big Fat Greek Wedding is the greatest success of independent film, it's like, it's not even really an independent film. It was produced by Rita Wilson, Tom Hanks's wife, and all that. Like, so, but all that said, that's my caveat here. Where the real crux of what's going on there at Sundance is you just have such an amazing array of diverse different films that are really drawing the attention. And then you have Donnie Darko, who, just like the movie itself, it's a very divisive movie. People love it or people hate it, I think, a lot. It's that kind of film. And then you have that kind of film, because I read some things about Sundance where people would be like, I hated this movie. It was my least favorite in the festival. And this is like people at the Q&A. And then someone else would be like, no, it was the best movie at the festival. And so you have that, whereas then you have Memento over here, which is, I would still think it's Christopher Nolan's best film. I love it so much. You have Memento over here. You have In the Bedroom over here. You have Hedwig and the Angry Inch, if you've ever seen that movie. It's just some crazy, powerful films that are going up against a film that, good or bad, it's a challenging film. It may be difficult to understand. So that's, I think, a big part of the context of what's going on there and how sort of everything came together in terms of it getting that distribution.
Yeah, and it's interesting if you to kind of compare the careers of Christopher Nolan and Richard Kelly, how very different, like Christopher Nolan's he's kind of like the darling of Hollywood, and he has the clout to say, hey, you know what, during the pandemic, I'm going to release Tenet. Like he has that clout with Warner Brothers, and you know what I mean? And then Richard Kelly has it, and again, I like the guy. I actually met him a couple times, and I love Donnie Darko. It's one of my favorite films of all time. But his career hasn't gone really much anywhere after the box, and which is really kind of sad and for me. But I just and
for
one thing
you,
that we
wait.
Oh, probably for me. Yeah,
Sad
I mean for him too.
I love that. The ultimate. That's just hilarious.
Yeah,
I know what you mean. But I got to give you a hard time about that one.
It's weird because I feel like personally attached to him because he made Donnie Darko feels like there's such a personal film that got certain things that are very specific to my upbringing and especially the interaction with adults because when I grew up, I was everybody can say this, but I was kind of a troubled kid. And a lot of times I would try to reach out to adults and they would give me it's part of God's plan. And, they give me these platitudes and it's I'm trying to find answers. And so there's this main theme of generational divide in the movie that that really resonates with me.
So one other thing that, I like that that I thought was interesting going back. Just I know that we always, I don't. At least I like to when you hear about the different casting. Jason Schwartzman almost played Donnie Darko, but he pulled out because of scheduling. Yeah, so and it was kind of a late game, and because once he got attached, that helped them get kind of the financing, because the script was what really grabbed people, and the script got people's attention, and all of a sudden, like Richard Kelly was saying that he was getting all these meetings and stuff because he was working like at the assistant, just like I read about how he was like, you know, the guy putting out the cheese trays and the coffee kind of thing for celebrities, and he was that guy, and he was just, okay, I gotta try to make something, so he wrote the script for this, and then it got out there, and as Paul said, but one of the things that was really interesting when I read that was that Jason Schwartzman was attached, and because it would have definitely been a different take and a different performance, and obviously a different, and one of the other guys is actually, I forget which actor, he's in Phantom Planet with Schwartzman, like Jason Schwartzman's
the bully.
band.
The bully with the mullet.
The goatee. Yeah.
He's the lead
Seth
singer.
Seth Rogen's buddy in that. Yeah,
and this is the first role with Seth Rogen in it, and he's like a total dick. It's so bizarre. His first line is, "I like boobs," or
this is after Freaks and Geeks. So, but it would have been his first feature role, like first film role. So he and Freaks and Geeks was like his first thing, and then this came, and it's kind of a funny thing, because like when you watch even Freaks and Geeks, you're like, wow, they cast him, and it's just like, whoa, Seth Rogen. Even as I was watching it again, I'm like, oh, that's him. Yeah, like Paul said, his first line,
I like your boobs, it's so pretty bizarre.
That's our context and background for the film, which is, I was kind of like, sort of crapping on the idea of this as an independent film, but it is an independent film, not in the truest sense of it. And, when you have Drew Barrymore financing your film, I can't think of it as independent, but to me, even this is one of those films that has such an interesting story and genesis and how it got made and how it got financed and or not financed, but financed, yes, but picked up by, thanks to like Christopher Nolan coming in as Batman-like moment and saying, you got to buy this movie and that kind of thing.
I heard even Francis Ford Coppola was interested in it, or
At one point, so basically there was a point where the script's floating around, and I think Paul mentioned this, but Richard Kelly, even though he was a kid, was like, I'm going to direct it. It's kind of like what an even more extreme version of what Matt Damon and Ben Affleck did with Good Will Hunting, where they're like, we're going to be in this movie. You can't make this without us.
And the weird thing with that was that like Ben Affleck had like one thing, he was already like in Dazed and Confused and a couple other movies, and kind of had clout, and kind of also had like a little bit of backing from like Kevin Smith especially to be able to direct the movie. And when Kevin Smith was like at his highest at this point, they were gonna be like, okay, if Kevin Smith's telling me to have him directed, I'll let him direct it with his friend. But like, and it kind of like the same thing with like Richard Kelly. Like, well, if he's it's like an M. Night Shyamalan like thing. Like M. Night Shyamalan did some like rewrites and some writing stuff, and then made The Sixth Sense, and everyone was just like, when he was able to make the movie, they're like, well, he's just so smart. I mean, he wrote this whole thing. We have to let him direct this. And so I think it's kind of like the same situation with Richard Kelly, I would assume.
Yeah, and I think it was just I read like things basically that like Francis Ford Coppola and different filmmakers were interested in it, and essentially he was like, I'm not giving it up. I'm not giving up my sort of baby. This is, and we're going to maintain its integrity. And maybe it would have been a $10 or $20 million film instead of a 4 to 6, but it was truly the vision he had, at least at that budget. And even like how they kind of got the songs and things, was just all this it was very sort of serendipitous, because it was a little bit before 80s nostalgia was really big. And so they were just that much more affordable than they would have been not all that much later, just a few years later. Like those songs now, I cannot imagine that would probably be half the budget of that movie. I cannot imagine what they would cost.
Yeah, no, that's interesting you bring that up, because that's something that it's kind of was ahead of its time. I think one of the first movies that kind of tapped into that 80s nostalgia and used the kind of like the DNA of like 80s Spielberg and Twilight Zone and the 80s kind of aesthetic in its favor, like, and the music, and so it's in a way it's ahead of its time. It's like, because if you think about it, like when this was made, it was probably 99 or 80, or 99 or 2000, and that was only like 12 years from 88. And so usually like with nostalgia, it's usually like in 25 or 30 years. Like if you look at Back to the Future, the 80s were kind of nostalgic for the 50s.
Yeah, or like Stranger Things Now kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was like really ahead of its time by like, I think like 10 years or something. Like
it's kind of like why half the movies we talk about are from 1988. We had like 40 movies. Like half of our movies have been from 1988 for whatever reason. Like
yeah, absolutely.
All these are, just Akira recently. So
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So where do you guys, there's so much to unpack, and we've talked a lot about sort of context for this film, which I think is important and very valid to the discussion. Where do you want to start with the text of the film? What do you think, Paul? Like, where do you? I think you're as the passion person here.
Start as what? I'm sorry.
Where do you want to start with the discussion of the film? Like the actual text of the film. I think that I want to. That it's your. It's as if like, oh, let's talk about Josiah's kids, and I would be the one to do that. So this movie is that for you in film terms.
Yeah, I just basically it's like how. What is your relation to this film? Like how like how do you feel about the cult status of it and how it's grown over time, and how do you like the themes of this movie? Because like the thing about this movie is like it's so open to interpretation. Like everybody has their own interpretation, and so like it can be viewed in very different perspectives. And so I think that there's really no right way to interpret this movie. And I see this movie like as an actual work of art, like an actual expression of Richard Kelly, his childhood, himself. Like it's and this thing is this movie is very visceral in that respect. So I mean, what do you think about the why this movie became a cult classic?
Way to start with the biggest question ever.
I haven't really spoken much, and so my whole thing is that I really like this movie as an angsty teenager, and I haven't seen this movie since I would say 2009. I now watching it since then. I guess 12 years later. Wow, I'm old. Stop it. Stop it time.
And you're the young one on the podcast, buddy.
Yeah, I know, right? You're the non-elderly one.
I cannot stand this movie. It was an absolute chore watching this movie. And unlike everybody else in this world, I think this script is unbelievably horrendous. I think almost every single scene is written so unearnest. Every character sounds so fake and sounds exactly like everybody sounds exactly the same character. Everybody. They all have the same dialogue, vocabulary, and everything. And it is so, except for of course Donnie Darko, where I think that's extremely intentional. But like this is one of those movies I think would have been so much better with a rewrite. Or somebody else's eyes peering in and being like, okay, let's let these teenagers sound like teenagers for 1 second. Let's let these side characters maybe not sound like exactly like the same. Like every teacher with Patrick Swayze, that crazy lady who, and the parents, like everybody sounds like the exact same character, including Jake Gyllenhaal's sister. Wow, I can't believe I'm forgetting her name.
Maggie
Gyllenhaal's character. Like she just, the whole time I'm just like, how old is she? I can't figure this out. How is she in high school? Is she not in high school? Why is she living with her parents? What does she do? What is her deal? Is she in college? Is she out of college? Like what is she? And like, yeah, and like I was asking myself all of these questions, and also I couldn't figure it out except for the one guy from ER. I couldn't figure out anybody's. Yeah, I couldn't figure out what anybody taught. Like Drew Barrymore was talking about, like in one scene she's talking about English, in the second scene she's talking about like theoretics and stuff like that, other weird shit. Like everything just seems so off, and bullies were just like hit and miss. I couldn't figure out who am I supposed to like, who am I supposed to dislike. I hate this film. I 100%.
Did you watch Donnie Darko or did you watch Josie and the Pussycats again? I disagree with every single thing you said, but every single thing you said, unfortunately. And no, it's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. But yeah, let's Josiah. I need to unpack what you just said.
Well, I think I'm going to kind of contextualize thing and bring it to a bit of a middle ground, because that's my feeling about this film. I'm more interested. I think I talk so much about the backstory because I find that more interesting to me. But I'll tell you this though. I don't hate it, but I way don't love it either. So, because I'm also impressed by it, understanding the feat of what it is.
Of course.
So,
I will give it credit where credit is due. And I do love the story. I just think a rewrite on the dialogue is what was needed. Like that was the issue. Was the dialogue was my issue. So if that helps.
So jumping on to the kind of contextualize it, I found this movie in a very similar way to Paul. And Paul and I were talking about this. We were texting back and forth last night about sort of how we came across it. And normally I'm the one who says save it for the episode, and Paul had to say it to me. But the way I came across it, I at the time I was I would follow Sundance and things like that closely. The big mark, sort of film festival markers, and Sundance really at that time was the big one, and Cannes and things like that. A few of them that I would actually actively pay attention to the movies and what movies were coming out, and what movies were getting buzz. So I heard about, like I said, most of those films, maybe not all of them at the time, but I definitely heard about this because kind of what Paul said, you have this weird sort of sci-fi Hollywood-ish independent film. It kind of, what genre is it, kind of had that talk, even though if I recall correctly, the buzz was a little bit divisive as well. And I think they did do some reshoots post Sundance as well. So there was some reshoots to after that once they got a distributor.
There's one specific scene where Jake Gyllenhaal does look older than he does in the rest of the movie. And I can't remember which scene it was. But I was just did he just age a year and a half or 2 years? Sorry. I'm not sure specifically, but I know they did some reshoots post getting the distributor.
So that said, the way I found it was very similar to Paul. I don't know if I was eating burrito, but I was sitting in the cafeteria. I'd have been a sophomore in college at that time. Not yet at USC. I hadn't transferred yet. I was still at Penn State. And I remember seeing that ad that Paul described in the newspaper. And I had heard about the movie, and I'm like, whoa, this is that movie? And I'm pretty sure that they were promoting that it was produced by Drew Barrymore. I think in that ad, I might have just been crossing my wires, but I think that's the weirdest way you could promote this movie. Because she's did Never Been Kissed and stuff. That was the Drew Barrymore, the kind of her comeback was full swing at that point. I think she had just done the new Charlie's Angels at that time. I remember Richard Kelly saying that he met with her on the set of Charlie's Angels. So, Drew Barrymore is really, arguably at the height of her powers in terms of box office draw. And so her championing this really mattered. And even though it's definitely a film outside of her wheelhouse, and I don't think she was very good casting in that role as the English teacher by any stretch of the imagination, just not a good fit for that role. It's like Mark Wahlberg in The Happening for, I want to play a science teacher instead of a Boston thug for once, but it just doesn't work. Yeah, so then like I said, I saw it in the theater and I liked it. But then I enjoyed it, and it made me think, and I all those things that it does. And then it came back several months later, and it really grew quickly on DVD as this huge cult film. So by the time it's big on DVD, I'm now at USC, actually, from Pennsylvania to SC, and it's a big deal. And everybody loves this movie, and they're analyzing it as if it's a Stanley Kubrick movie. And that was where it kind of hit me that it's well, this wants to be a Stanley Kubrick movie, and it tries really hard, but it's not. Stanley Kubrick didn't start at 2001: A Space Odyssey or The Shining. He worked his way up to that. And I totally credit the ambition of Richard Kelly for wanting to start at 2001: at The Shining level stuff. But it doesn't get there. And I think for me, the movie's good. It's okay. But I also think that there are flaws in it. Like the logic is very it's actually hard to follow, even though it's the time thing. It's confusing, the significance of the characters and how even within the movie, how the rules of time travel work, and you really need to watch the director's cut to even understand that, which is a little bit of a problem as well, where it kind of, if you've seen the director's cut, it gives you a lot of context of the stuff from that book that he has, that the lady wrote, but you don't really understand it in the theatrical version of the film. You don't have the guidance. And then they have like these little snippets of conversation that things, and so that's kind of my take on it, that it's a good movie. I think that, not to discount like Paul and people that love it, because I just didn't attach to it. I just didn't get why people fell in love with it so much. And I do think that some of the like performances aren't great from the cast. I think that Jake Gyllenhaal, for example, is trying almost too hard at times. And like it's the nature of the character, but it's like he's trying to be Holden Caulfield while he's this 80s kid, and he's a great actor. Like, watch Nightcrawler, things like that. And again, I think it's just young people, and I think that maybe that I want to respect it more than I am, that are trying really hard, but not yet masters of their craft, making a film that tries to be a master level film. And I appreciate the ambition again and again and again. But I think it's like built on blocks of great ideas that just maybe doesn't hold up for me. And I'm trying not to hate on it too much, because I do still like it and I enjoy watching it, even though it's very different, kind of as Tyler said, watching it much, much later, having not watched it in a very long time.
I feel like this is like one of those movies like the first Clerks movie, where I think when you're younger or in more simplistic times like the 90s or early 2000s, we gravitate towards and love. And now that we've seen and have access to so much more, film has evolved a lot and storytelling has evolved a lot and changed since then. Like a 90s movie is completely paced and made completely differently than a movie today that we would gravitate towards. Look at the MCU just alone. MCU, every single movie, if they were to try to make any of those, with practical effects or anything like in the 90s, it would be completely different films. Everything is made differently now because of technology, because of different ways of us expressing ourselves, especially with the use of internet and instancy and stuff like that. And so, like, a lot of movies like in the 90s would resonate with us, where a lot of people nowadays, like, Gen Z and stuff like that, won't really appreciate. And especially for me, I don't really like 90s movies. I know this doesn't constitute as one. As a whole, I think the 90s was the worst decade for film. But in my opinion, of course, there's some great films in it, but I just think if you get everything overall, like, holy crap. But with this movie, again, I think it was a great idea, great concept. I think it needed a stronger director to guide the cast, because I think everybody was casted pretty well. Maybe Drew Barrymore. I agree with you. I think Drew Barrymore is a phenomenal actor, and I actually really love her. And I actually really loved her as a director. I wish she directed more, because I really love Whip It. I really wish, maybe she played something else, or they maybe tweaked her character to sound a little bit more like her. But I think maybe like a stronger director to tell people, hey, I know how to tell an actor, I know how to help an actor with the scene, if needed, to find their character. And I think, like, with somebody with a baby character, maybe somebody who's so attached to the story, and maybe somebody who's so highly praised by possibly the script, because it sounds like this script was so hot that it was just like, okay, like, what do we do with it, and what do we not do with it? It's like one of those big situations. And so, anyway, I digress. I think there was a lot of potential for this film, and it just Right. I would also say the same thing about most M. Night Shyamalan movies, where like they're great concepts sometimes. Like I don't think The Happening was honestly that bad of a concept. It's just, man, if you have somebody behind the camera who doesn't know how to work with an actor or how to cast the correct actor or to have the characters say what they really should say to bring people into a scene, the movie falls apart. And unfortunately, this movie to me is like watching The Happening. I watched this movie twice, and it took me, I think, 3 hours each time. I had to pause and just be like, oh my God, that scene was exhausting, because I want to rewrite it now. I want to personally rewrite that scene. It's that aggravating. Like when you have somebody like Jake Gyllenhaal, who's an amazing actor, when you have people like Patrick Swayze, who was unbelievable. Like, again, the cast was great, but I just think they needed a director to tell them what to do, or they just weren't right for the roles. Like, I agree with Josiah. I think at one point I was just like, is Jake Gyllenhaal trying to be William Shatner here in the scene? Is he channeling William Shatner? And I think it's just like when he's just like staring at the mirror, and it was just so corny. But anyway, sorry, I'm gonna stop shitting on it so hard. I'm so sorry.
I wildly disagree with every single thing you said, every word, every single thing you said. And the thing is, here's the thing. I'm okay. Like, that's your opinion. If you don't like the movie, that's fine. I didn't personally make it. If you don't like it, it doesn't affect me in any way. I know that's not the right answer to say in a YouTube show, but that's the way I view things. It's like, if you have a different opinion, that's cool. It doesn't affect me. It doesn't bother me at all. I personally love this movie, and I'll probably admit, like, part of it is maybe I'm looking at this with rose-tinted glasses, kind of thing. But like, I think he was the perfect director for this movie because he knew the material way better than any other director that could have been hired to do it, whether they're confident or experienced or new camera angles. Like and I'll give you an example. Like the very first shot was the shot of Donnie on his bike, and where it's a Steadicam shot, and it kind of dollies over, and you see the profile of Donnie Darko, and then it scoops around again, and then you see the marine layer of the hills, and you have the music and the killing moon, and him, the Steadicam going down on the bike. That all was him. That was like his very first shot filming this movie, and like that shot itself is so visually beautiful and striking. And in fact, that marine layer and the sunset or the sunrise, I thought it was a matte painting because it was so beautiful, way beautiful than I could envision. But it actually was a real shot. It really happened. There's no CGI, no trick, nothing to create that shot. Another thing is the opening school shot with the Head Over Heels by Tears of Fears, where the camera rotates and its Steadicam follows all the characters and introduces, through no dialogue whatsoever, it introduces all the characters, and you really get a sense of who they are based on their facial expressions, the way they interact with other people, like Mrs. Farmer, the way she's judging the bullies, and you see the principal and he's guiding Drew Barrymore, and they're introducing Patrick Swayze, and it's like this really beautiful 5-minute segment that says so much with no dialogue. And so you really have an understanding of who these characters are before they even say anything. So it really builds this really fantastic world right off the bat.
Can I ask you, what do you think of the multiple uses of that then? Because that's one of the things that I thought was a good introduction, but then it became a bit redundant in the film, where you have a couple of examples where it's like for lack of a better way to put it, the music video segments that then happen. Do you think that... Oh,
like the Notorious scene where the kids are dancing?
Yeah, and there's a couple different times where there's segments like that over those 80s songs throughout the film that are peppered in there.
I feel like it's very much a product of its time, because that was the 80s. Like, when you turn on the TV, you're usually watching VH1 or MTV, and you're watching music videos that are expressing their story through images and lights and not really dialogue. So it's like kind of a subtle expression of what the 80s were and how they were, how the 80s was at that time. And so I think it's actually very clever to do that, to have these segments that are basically music videos integrated into the narrative of the movie.
I'm not trying to shit on this movie. I promise. I'm really not trying to. But I feel like American Beauty and Requiem for a Dream did the exact same thing, and more effectively. And I think that there are other movies that had come out prior to this movie that did the exact same thing, and even movies in the 80s and 90s loved the Steadicam craziness thing because that was when everything was essentially perfected. And I feel like a lot of movies, a lot of dramas were shot this way. And like I said, most notoriously American Beauty, I think. And well, that's my complaint though. Is like this borrows so much.
That's the thing. Is like I feel like the use of Steadicam gives a sense of intimacy with the characters because essentially you're like peeking into their life and you're really getting an understanding of the family dynamics between Donnie and his sister and his mom and so you're really like I like the way the camera moves because it gives you a sense of like the whole room and like a sense of like the placement of all the characters and it's almost like I view it as like you're almost like a like you're a voyeur into this very intimate moment of these characters' lives. Like you almost become a character yourself in the movie, and so I just feel like the characters themselves are very like authentic and damaged and rough, and they feel very I don't know. They just really resonate with me in ways that characters don't usually do. So I honestly like I have like even like Drew Barrymore. I really like her performance in that she's kind of the segue between the older generation, like Miss Farmer and the mom and dad, and like Patrick Swayze. It's like she's kind of like this the adult that kind of understands the students and tries to connect with them through Graham Greene, the Destructors, but still has that wall because she's kind of like has one foot in each world between the Donnie's kids Donnie's age and then also the people that are the adults. And so because she's kind of connected to the kids in that way and she's able to kind of reach out to them in ways that the therapist and even like the parents are not able to, she gets fired. Like there's a whole controversy about the Destructors because the whole school gets flooded with the water when Donnie breaks the water main, and then becomes this whole controversy, and essentially she gets fired because of it, because of this book that's controversial, and the book that gets pulled because Miss Farmer's she's offended by it, and like that itself is something that really resonates nowadays. That when people get offended, this thing is canceled. Like we can't, we need to protect the youth, all that stuff. That's something that still happens to this day. So there's a lot of themes and a lot of things that happen in this movie that still happen to this day and really resonate with me. And I honestly, I love the score. The Michael Andrews score is very unique and moody and subtle and really just...
Yeah, the music, without a doubt, you can hate this movie and just be mesmerized by the music, from the pop songs to the score. It is
absolutely
fantastic. You can judge those things completely separately and love absolute brilliance in the music, the top to bottom. Even though, I said, those segments might not work for me in the way they work for Paul, but they're executed beautifully. I didn't jump on that earlier, but But go ahead, Paul. You want to talk more about the music?
Oh, yeah. I think the music creates a really good atmosphere. And the thing about this movie is, it is, to me, this is perfect tapestry. It works so well together that even if you do the additions from the director's cut and you change the music and you change sound effects here and there, even the beginning opening shot, they don't have the Killing Moon by Eka and the Bunnymen. They have another song. It kind of unravels it. So for me, the director's cut doesn't work because of that. And also, the director's cut, at least, actually a lot of people like the director's cut more. I dislike it because I feel like it holds your hand through everything. It has pages of the philosophy of time travel, and they try to explain things a little bit more. I think there's really great character moments in the director's cut. There's this moment with Donnie and his dad. And, his dad's I used to be like you. I used to be crazy when I was your age. And then Donnie's like, well, what'd you do? It's I just told them to go fuck themselves. And it's this really nice moment between the dad and Donnie where in this whole movie, that's a good scene, and that would have enhanced the original theatrical cut. And so, I think, like that's the whole thing in that movie is this generational divide between, this youth that, Drew Barrymore says it's slipping away, that we're losing them to apathy. And, and it's always striking to me how everybody reacts to Donnie in very different ways. Mary McDonnell, great actress. And I think her as Rose Darko, she's amazing. She goes to Donnie and she's like, what? Did he toilet paper the neighbor's house? Like, what? I don't recognize my son. Who are you? And he's like upset because he's like, leave me alone. Like, I'll do what I want to do. And she walks out and he goes, bitch. And she gets hurt. But it's like, that's just a very specific, humane thing. Like that happened a lot in my childhood where I lashed out and said something hurtful to my parents just when they were trying to reach out to me and connect with me. And I kind of responded in like a caustic, abrasive way because I was a teenager and I was kind of a shithead, because, teenagers are, they're like full of emotions. They don't know to process their feelings and hormones and everything. And so like, that's a very specific thing that really resonated with me. And here's the thing here, like, again, one of the things is generational divide. And like, the reason why I'm so attached to this movie, I'll explain why I'm so attached to this movie. And because I could talk about camera angles and all that shit, for days. But the reason why is because I saw this movie on DVD and I was at home. It was during like winter break or something. And my dad, he's, I had an old dad and he was born in like Germany, like post-war Germany after World War II. And he's like, I had problems connecting with him. Like I didn't know like how to, like I would try to talk to him and he would say like, oh, times were tough. And that's all he would say. Like he's not a very, verbose person. Like a lot of what he says is very guarded. And so, he went to check on me. He came in my bedroom and I was watching Donnie Darko and he's like hovering over and he's just watching it. And he's like kind of just hovering on my chair and watching it. And I was watching it. And I was like, hey Dad, what's going on? He's like, hold on. And he's always watching it. And then he like takes the time to like take a chair and put the chair down. And he sits next to me and he watches it. And he watched the whole movie. And I go ahead and ask him, it's like, hey Dad, did you like it? What'd you think? He's like, it's good. It's good. And, puts the chair away and he walks out. And right there is like the ultimate compliment. Like my dad didn't like a lot of the things that I liked, but we had that moment where he enjoyed something that I really loved at the same time. Like we had that connection. And, I miss my dad. He passed away about 5 years ago. But I just like that moment right there. It's like, it's a good memory. And so I tie it to this film. And so I'm so, I don't know. And I'm glad I was able to say that without like tearing up or anything. But it really, this movie like really resonates with me. And it has a good memory of my dad. And so I'm so biased. Like I don't see the flaws in this movie as much as I want to in a way. But yeah, and sorry, Go ahead.
Paul, have you read the Graham Greene short story, The Destructors?
No, I haven't.
I think you should read it, especially understanding the time your dad grew up. It's set in, I think, like London post-war, but it kind of reflects being essentially a child born out of that kind of destruction, and when that's the world around you. And that's why the idea that they are the Destructors, like sounds like the way I said it sounds like a Transformer, which is very Paul. Unicron all up in the house, right, Paul?
I know, right? They're right behind me. So, I tripped over that the other day, by the way.
The giant Unicron HasLab box. If you don't know what that is, look it up. Paul has one, and we're going to open it together.
Yeah,
someday.
It's ridiculous.
But I think that story would help you see maybe a window into at least a similar world to the one your dad actually grew up in, just when having read it. So that said, but I think thank you for sharing that. That's always and that's what I love when we do this, and I love talking about these guys with film, because it's kind of why these things matter, why film matters. It's not just an artifact of a movie. it's an experience, an emotional experience, greater life. And that's why the best and worst of film, it's always an amazing achievement, because this film, even if you dislike it, you have to admit it's an artistic endeavor, and it tries like hell. And I respect that. I think it just, to me, it's a bunch of ideas and themes that they maybe almost too much, that then it doesn't get to really examine any of them as much as it should. And then that confuses the through line of the actual narrative story. So that hurts it. But at the same time, when you rewatch it and you kind of deconstruct it, it's also enriches that experience. Although I can also see why Tyler doesn't like rewatching it, because I hate rewatching the scenes, not all the scenes in therapy, but those are not my favorite scenes. And I just, especially the Christina Applegate scene, I don't even want to go into it. I hate that scene. I think that scene does not need to be in the film, and that's it doesn't move the story further. It's just it's there to get you to talk about that scene. But I'm sort of digressing here, because I want to use this to talk about, this is the beauty of cinema. This is what it can do. Whether you love movie A or movie B or don't, it's when you share that experience with someone. And I can think of other examples of film like that in my life, like with Paul. And moments with my dad are similarly few and far between. I am very thankful to still have my dad, I'll say that. But, and maybe I pray that maybe I get a chance for a few more moments like that. And COVID's really sucked, because my dad hasn't met my youngest daughter. She's 18 months old and he hasn't met her. That kills me. But all that said, I'm going to get the teary-eyed one. It's just the beauty of film is here in this movie, because it tries to say something. And I completely respect if you hate it, and I completely respect if you love it. And that's a weird thing about it, because I get it. Because I see it through more of a sort of a measured lens, I guess. Even though I saw it at the time, I didn't have a deeper connection to it. I enjoyed it, and it just kind of and then it went away for me. And then it came back on DVD, and it was a topic of conversation. But at the same time, I think of countless moments, moments with Judy, moments with friends of mine, watching a movie, maybe unexpectedly. I remember watching with my friend Watson, who, this is probably the last movie we saw together, not too long before this, The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. In that moment, at the end, when everybody puts their hands on Bill Murray, and I felt with my friend, who's still a great friend to me today, we haven't seen each other in a while, but we always communicate with a group of friends in a text, and that's one of those moments like that with Paul, where I felt with my friend that are his hands on my shoulders, and sort of that emotional, spiritual sense. And that's why I love sharing these conversations with you, because when I get to hear that from Paul, I feel that, man. And that's why I write. When I write, kids have slowed down that process, because even when I can connect in a movie that I don't love, that's when it's amazing and powerful. When it's a movie I love, it's easy. Empire Strikes Back, it's me. Certain other movies, like Almost Famous, is a movie from this time frame that really influenced me as a person. But there's a million more. But when I think about that, and now I love that I'll watch this movie in the future, and it'll resonate in a new way that I hope anybody out there watching can have that feeling connected through Paul. And I think that's a little bit of the theme of the movie, because you have Donnie Darko, who is this character who's very disconnected from the world. And one thing I thought the movie did do well is he finds connection through Jenna Malone's character. Her name's escaping me, the character name, but
Gretchen Ross.
Yeah, through her character, he finds a reason to care about the world. He's Holden Caulfield, but he finds that attachment. I think in Holden Caulfield, it's kind of like his sister is his sort of attachment to the world kind of thing. And so I think that if you love a movie or hate a movie, the lesson is to understand the power of any film that can have to push the dial forward in a personal level in your life and move you and help you see things in a way you haven't before. And I think this movie does that on its own merits, aside from that kind of story.
I think what's interesting about this movie is like it feels like the very last scene that they shot was the shot of Donnie Darko, or he was burning Jim Cunningham's house, and it's all flaming up, and he walks away. That was the very last scene, and that really resonated with the Destructors, like, you know, destruction as a form of creation. And so in a way that the fact that was the last scene filmed, it was very poetic. And, you know, something I have to share, and honestly, the whole desire to analyze and deconstruct the film and understand the hidden meaning, camera angles, everything. My love of film really, really starts, like, I loved like Back to the Future and things like that, but my ability, like wanting to go deeper into the production, all that stuff, started with this film. Started with this one. And honestly, if it wasn't for this film, there would be no Popmosis. Like, I wouldn't have any kind of interest in really analyzing film in the way we do. And I wouldn't have had the conversation with Josiah that I had without this movie. Like this, I realized watching it that this is the beginning. This is where, you know, 19-year-old me was like, hey, movies, there's much more to film than just watching and enjoying them. So, yeah, without Donnie Darko, there's no Popmosis. This movie is exceptionally important to me. And I recommend you check it out and form your own opinion. You know, we're probably all the spectrum of that opinion, but form your own opinion and see what you think, and let us know on the comments, or subscribe, or, you know, do all that stuff. Just let us know what you think about this movie, because I really would love to hear your interpretation, because it's always very unique to the person that's watching the film.
And on that note, Josiah, where can they find more?
You can find me on YouTube and Instagram, mostly YouTube, but, well, probably mostly on Instagram, but YouTube is where, like, you get stuff like this, similar content, and also a lot of toy stuff. But Josiah is Write, W-R-I-T-E, and be sure to subscribe to both channels to be entered into our t-shirt contest. You could win a t-shirt like this. I got my Gathering shirt on today, so you could win a Grand Geek Gathering t-shirt. Be subscribed to me, Josiah is Write, and be subscribed here on the Grand Geek Gathering.
All right. And Paul?
Oh, I'm on Instagram as Arcade Blackfire, and yeah.
And thanks for listening in. You can check out all of our shows and offerings on thegrandgeekgathering.com. Please go ahead and subscribe, and also like the video. That helps us out so much. And we have other podcasts on our YouTube channel, and also on every single podcast app. And on our website, we have articles and so much more as well. And you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We also have our own Discord, and I stream on Twitch, where we have Marvel Talkbacks. I will stream while I edit, and we have some other shows that are actually like live, and then we put them out on podcast apps and stuff like that, like our show anyway.
I forgot to mention this, so there you go.
And we end with a signed Donnie Darko.
Yep.
Have a wonderful week. Wear a mask, and GGG.
What's on the silver screen? Makes you wouldn't believe.